Welcome everyone. This is the second in our series of videos about the history of St. Mary's Abbey and Delbarton School, and you're ready to learn a little bit more about the Kountze family, the people who built Old Main, who created this estate and made this property possible for the monks of St. Mary's Abbey to buy in 1925, with the monks establishing the first monastic community life here in 1927. I'm standing right now on the east terrace of Old Main, and over my left shoulder you can see the ridge line that greets our visitors to our campus every day. And you might even be able to see in a very tiny way at the top of that ridge, that water tower. The top of that ridge where that water tower is, that was, in the 1880s, the northern boundary of the 4,000 acres that Martin Luther Kountze assembled when he created the estate that he eventually named Delbarton. So who were the Kountzes? How did they come to be in this part of Morris County? And how did the monks of St. Mary's Abbey eventually end up here? Well, the story goes back to 1841, when Martin Luther Kountze was born to German immigrant parents in the little town of Osnaburg, Ohio, which still exists today, and which is near modern-day Canton. Eventually, this immigrant family prospered, and in 1857, they opened a bank in Omaha, Nebraska, in what was then Nebraska Territory. As the family flourished and eventually established themselves later on in banking and mining in Denver, Colorado, in 1868, Luther, who was a partner with his brothers Herman, Augustus, and Charles in the banking business, was sent east to establish what became known as Kountze Brothers Bank. It was at that time that he established himself and put down roots in the New York area. He entered the highest reaches of New York society when he married Anne Parsons, who was a descendant of very distinguished old-time New York families, the Delanceys and the Barclays. This family eventually had 3 children, and it was those 3 children's names that eventually gave this estate its distinctive name. Like many other families in this area in the late 1870s and the early 1880s, if you were a prosperous family in New York City, having a little place in the country was something that was expected, and the Kountzes were no different. If you think this area of Morris County would be perfect for such a place, you'd be right. Just over at Villa Walsh, for example, what used to be the Gillespie estate was purchased by the Archdiocese of Newark and given to the Filippini sisters to become their mother house and eventually the site of Villa Walsh Academy. And a number of other estates in this area were transformed into those religious purposes. And that would eventually be the case here at Delbarton. This property, as I said, eventually made up about 4,000 acres, having part of the property in Harding Township and part of the property in Morris Township. Kountze imagined this place to be a working farm, and it had a dairy barn with a dairy herd, it had large truck garden, cornfields, wheat fields, cattle, pigs, chickens, you name it. Everything you'd need for a property like this to be fairly self-sustaining. You would think that with all of that effort made into creating a working farm on 4,000 acres, that the Kountzes would be here fairly regularly. But in fact, they only spent a few weeks here a year. Once the property was finally assembled, Kountze went about building the house that we now call Old Main. The house was begun in 1882, was completed in 1883. And it's about 35,000 square feet. It's an enormous building. And it was designed, like other houses of the time, to be a place of retreat, of relaxation, where an army of servants would take care of this family's every need. The name of the estate came from the names of Kountze's 3 children, William Delancey, Barclay Ward, and Anne Livingston Kountze. He took a syllable from each, and so we get Delbarton. When the monks came in the 1920s and eventually created the school that we know as Delbarton School in 1939, the name stuck, because that's how everybody in the area knew this particularly special property. So as I said, this was not a place where the Kountze family came for any length of time except in the summer. The house did not have central heat, although it has many fireplaces. And if you've been to Old Main, you can see the large number of windows. There are 75 of them in the house. You also can see the French doors on any number of areas on the first floor, where you get that sense of the place being open and airy, an ideal location to while away weeks of the summer. Eventually, Luther Kountze died in April of 1918 from the influenza epidemic that was sweeping the world at the time. And his heirs didn't want to keep the estate up, and so they put it up for sale. It actually had 2 different sales that all fell through before, on the third try, the monks of St. Mary's Abbey in 1925 purchased 400 acres of the original estate for a whopping sum of $155,000. With that, they got all the central farm area, the chicken house, Old Main itself, of course, and that acreage that the monks used first as a seminary, as a place where young men could be trained in monastic life and theological study. And then eventually, in 1939, 14 years after they purchased the estate, a small junior high school for 6th, 7th, and 8th graders was opened here in Old Everything, as Old Main would have been known at the time, because this was the place where students and staff lived, worked, played, and ate. So the Kountze family bequeathed to us this magnificent setting and enabled us to plant seeds that have grown into the Delbarton we know and love today.